This is a bit of research in progress. There are a lot of loose ends, and I really don't understand what the hell is going on. So let's see where we get to. That's Pseudokarst caves in Folkestone Sands. It was triggered, stimulated, shall I say, by the Godstone cave collapse 3-4 months ago. So to get started, what on earth are pseudokarst caves? I expect most people are familiar with the term karst from your GCSE geography or whatever. In Southeast Europe, where there's a lot of limestone scenery, you have this very peculiar landscape where the limestone dissolves and gives very complex cave systems and very weird superficial landscape. And now, a little bit of basic science to get us started, the starting point really. Calcium carbonate is soluble in acid. Silica is insoluble in acid. Limestones are largely composed of calcium carbonate. Sandstones are largely composed of silica. Rainwater is generally acidic. Therefore, we would not be surprised to have lots of caves in limestone terrain. We would not expect to find caves in sandstone terrain. And that's what I've always thought from my very earliest days of geology. However, there are natural caves in sandstones, and boy, are they weird. I would just go through this very quickly to show you that the Folkestone Sands are not alone. But the mechanisms are so strange. Aztec sandstone in Navajo area, the caves there are due to wind erosion of saline cements in the sands. The second lot, in Venezuela and indeed in China, what is happening here is that you have two strata of very well cemented sandstone. In the middle is a soft sand, high porosity and permeability. Chemicals percolate down from the upper layer in pillars and precipitate as rigid pillars. Running water then erodes away the soft sand and leaves you with this really weird cave system with pillars sticking up everywhere. Who would have thought it? I'll show you 1 or 2 slides very quickly. And then lastly, we have the Folkestone Sands, which again are pretty weird to have caves in, whether they're man-made or natural. Very quickly, examples of the first type. This is the Aztec sandstone. These are Aeolian cave systems, wind-blown into a softly cemented sand. Obviously, those caves don't go very far into the rock surface, but they're quite scenic and quite dramatic. How about that? Isn't that weird? And that is where you have a well-cemented layer of sandstone at the top, well-cemented sandstone underneath, an intervening bed of soft sand, and groundwater percolates down from above and precipitates as those pillars. And then running water dissolves away, carries away, doesn't dissolve, sorry, carries away the soft sand, and you're left with that. And this is now the Chinese example. And on the right, what's happened there is the upper layer of cemented sandstone has weathered away, and you are left with these pillars. And I think it's that sort of scenery that started people using the term pseudokarst. It does look rather like karstic topography, but this is in sandstone, not in limestone. Weird. And I never knew any of this until I started researching this little talk yesterday. Now, the Folkestone Sands, we're all locals, we're all familiar with a lot of the basics of the Folkestone Sand, Lower Cretaceous in age, shallow marine sands. This is what they look like under the microscope. And thin section, and that's pretty odd. They're very angular with concavities, and sometimes you've got sand grains actually pushed into the concavities. Very strange fabric, quite unusual for a polycyclic shallow marine shelf sand. For example, on the left, that's what we expect to see when we look at a shallow marine shelf sand under the microscope, Simpson sand from North America. Contrast that with what we have on the right in the Folkestone Sand. That is very weird. I'm not going to talk about the diagenesis, the cementation history of that. I could explain it to you, but that will delight you on another occasion. And that fabric is known to geologists as locked sand, but builders call it sharp sand. Areas of the Folkestone Sands have been mined for sharp sand for building. I didn't know this, the things you learn when you prepare a lecture for the MVGS. But for cementing buildings, you really need angular sand grains, not well-rounded ones. So we have sharp sand in the Folkestone Sands, and geologists call these locked sands. They're locked because they can take a high amount of vertical load, but very little lateral stress. Hence why they're easy to mine without collapsing often, unless you put running water through them, and then you have a problem. So I began to get interested in the Folkestone Sands originally because I was appointed a magistrate on the Dorking bench some 40 years ago, in the old days when we had jurisdiction over licensing. So one of my duties was to tour all the pubs in Dorking, and I would go down to the cellars, of course, and this was how I discovered that the Aroma, the restaurant here, was a former town brothel because of that information. So I got interested in caves, got interested in the famous South Street caves that most of you, I think, have now visited, and so hence my interest in caves. And so here's a very curious account. This is a terrible way of giving a presentation, to actually read something from the screen, but this is very important. This is from the British Geological Survey memoir for this area, for the Reigate Dorking area. An interesting occurrence of natural underground water channels in the Folkestone beds was noted in 33 at Collie Sand Pit, Betchworth. North face of the pit, about 80 feet high, openings of two circular tunnels, 2 feet in diameter, 50 feet from the surface. These tunnels ran north to south, and that's a bit weird. What on earth are those tunnels doing in that sand? And then there's a very interesting character who is now deceased, but he lectured to us a while back, Paul Selley, and I'm sure people familiar with local geology will remember the name of Paul. He gave us a talk many years ago, a real progenomorph, hangover from a previous age. He wouldn't do email or anything like that, but a fascinating man. And he, with his local cave group, this was the Croydon Natural History Society, and their cave research and exploration group examined some very strange caves here in Reigate that he described as pseudokarst. Now, I downloaded his article from the Wealden Cave Society. The quality of the photograph is terrible, I'm afraid, but it's very important that you grasp the scale of what is going on here. That is Paul Selley. So he's, say, about 2 meters high. There is a cave in Folkestone Sand. And he and his colleagues, the largest, most impressive cave, entrance arch of 12 meters span, up to 3 to 4 meters high. And they traced this for 30 meters underground. Not a very sensible thing to do. And at the end, he said, you know, he doesn't recommend this because this is in soft sand. And while they were there, an adjacent tunnel collapsed. So, you know, what on earth are these tunnels doing? These are not man-made. Right, and now then to the Dorking caves. And I've been down these caves on and off, it must be now for 20 years or so, so I know them pretty well. But there's one area that has always puzzled me. This is a rather nice survey that shows in great detail the architecture of the famous South Street caves. So for those of you familiar, you come in here onto this. That's a well shaft. You go across the well shaft, down, down, down. That's the mystery chamber. And you remember last month I talked about the mystery chamber, and it's right next to a well shaft. I'll be talking about that later on. But what has always puzzled me is this gallery here. It's wider than the other ones. It's very irregularly shaped. And what is its purpose? You know, these are for wine storage, so it makes sense. You cut a gallery to store wine here, a gallery to store wine here. But what do you need this curious gallery here? And why is it so different? And there's something else that's very strange. All through the caves, we see pickaxe marks. These caves are obviously man-made. With respect to the ladies in the audience, I really do think they were probably man-made. And so there's no question these are artificially made caves. However, in that funny cross-cut gallery, the wall is very, very strange. And I have looked at this for years and thought, I do not understand that wall. It is very odd. Some of you, I'm sure, have done potholing. You know how in limestone you get these really smooth surfaces and sort of fluted edges every now and again, where the rushing water has scalloped and made this very strange shape to it. And I said to me, surely that looks as if that's been carved by running water, but what the hell? You don't get running water here in sandstone. So Jean Ward, bless her, took these photographs for me recently for this talk. So you see what I mean? This is a smooth surface. This is a montage. I put 3 photographs together. It's a smooth surface and it's scalloped. You can't see the scalloping effect very well on those photographs. There are, of course, up here, that's obviously man-made. You can see the pickaxe marks. And again, this is in that same gallery, but this is now looking up at the roof. So the roof of this is obviously man-made, but that side of it, most of that gallery, it has an odd shape, it's wider than the others, and this very smooth surface. I just did not understand that. And then the other thing, maybe I'll show the next slide first because it'll make sense. Those of you who came last month, will you remember me talking about the mystery chamber and the well beside it and how we worked out the paleo water table level. And I think I may have mentioned in passing the legend of the boat. And I go back here, and several people have written about this. And again, apologies, I'm going to read part of this, but it's critically important. We hear dramatic Victorian accounts of a black river flowing beneath the town, at least 2 sightings of a boat sunk in this alleged smuggler's route. Dorothy Ellen Tyson tells of a visit to the caves by candlelight. At one's feet gleamed a river, black and silent and not a little terrifying. Here the underground stream was about 18 feet wide, and most mysterious and thrilling of all, against the opposite wall, out of reach, deep water, lay the wreck of an old boat. And again, 1889, about 40 years later, journalists was pointed towards the remnants of a punt that floated here. And in one of my cave guidebooks, I pontificated. Yes, the other bit here. A man said to me when I got him down there, yes, he said, my dad had a photograph of the boat. And I said, oh, please, can you let me see it? His dad had died. The photograph was in his father's loft, and I never heard back from him. So there are these sort of 3 quite separate accounts of this boat in this at the bottom of the well. And the lower part of the well, by the way, is infilled by sand. You can't see any tunnel that there might have been there. It would have been deeper down. So when I wrote this notorious little volume, the account that I gave of it, I said, could it be that what she actually saw beneath the water was the roof of the old wellhead, right? We've got a water well there. And that when the well was abandoned, the wellhead at the top, all the timber, they just said, what are we going to do with this? Just shove it down the well shaft. So that's what they saw, timber by candlelight in the dark, no electricity in those days. And that's how the legend of the boat began. So putting these accounts together, a database, those are the number of curious caves that I've come across in this very brief survey. The Collie Sandpit ones in the first BGS memoir, 33, north-south alignment, no details of the length, but they were 60 centimeters in height. The next block at Red Hill, these were the ones Paul Sallen described, 30 meters, over 30 meters in length, 3 to 4 meters in height. And then these weird ones, the upper gallery, the South Street Cave, maybe 2 meters high, 6 meters in length. And then the bottom of the well shaft, well, who really knows? So it's all very odd, and it is flying against all my preconceptions that you don't have caves in sandstone, and boats and things like that has to be a load of rubbish. So my conclusions, trying to pull this together, caves are widespread throughout the Folkestone Sands, throughout the Weald. They're obviously man-made. You can see the pickaxe marks, no question about it. But there are these smooth-sided caves, 2 to 4 meters high, up to 30 meters long. One explanation, and this is the one that the BGS subscribed to, and I've been in touch with the BGS the last few weeks trying to get a feel for this. They think that what is happening during modern quarrying, you've got these loosely consolidated sands, very high porosity and permeability. Once they start quarrying those sands as water saturated, the water flows out of the sands and it flows out in these pipes, these tubes, these caves. I've also flown all of this past some of my geoengineering, geotechnical colleagues at Imperial College. They've come up with an interesting idea. We know that during the ice ages, the glaciers got as far as the Thames, but this was all permafrost. What happens if you have got aquifers like the Folkestone Sand, water saturated, sealed in by permafrost, come the warming up of an interglacial, suddenly that permeability barrier will be breached. Could you possibly be getting floods of water and sand coming out, generating those tunnels? I'm just going to leave it hanging there. Thank you for listening.
Yes. That raises so many interesting issues and that sort of stuff. Questions? Here we go.
Thank you. Richard, a couple of simple things. First of all, piping in an engineering context is a very frequent hazard if you're building embankments or whatever. And in fact, your mention of the landslide in Switzerland has dammed the floor of the valley. And those sorts of naturally created dams are extremely prone to subsequent piping failures, where seepage coming out of this mix of stuff, which is the landslide, gradually saps its way back headward until eventually you can get a complete failure and then a catastrophic dam busters type flood down the valley. This particular landslide is quite wide. It'll take a very long time to achieve that. And I won't go into anything else in that particular regard. But there are other examples of what I call pseudo-piping in Dorking. One, for instance, is in Wathen Road, where shortly after the houses were built there, and they were built different designs for different people then planning to have one to this model or that, somebody had a leaking downpipe. And you only get piping if the water flow can carry the sand away. If it's just percolating through, you have no problem. But if there's an open face, whether it be a quarry, as Richard was talking about, or something comparable, and in this particular case, the leaking drain pipe, obviously somebody hadn't made the drain properly, and then that started to wash the sand away. And that is why if you look in Wathen Road, you'll see one of the properties, I think it's the left-hand side of it, is at an angle to the rest of the property because they basically had to prop it up. I did get asked to go to a site down, and I don't know whether it was Folkestone Sands, somewhere down in Kent, and this is many years ago, where a big hole had opened up in somebody's back garden. and I could not see any sign of a pipe in, or let alone a pipe out of any sort. But it was really the only explanation for a hole that was 3 meters by 2 meters in area and probably went 2 meters deep. But again, for the sand to have collapsed to avoid, you've got to have removed the sand. So there has to be a mechanism, a piping mechanism, or an artificial route somehow.
Yeah, I'd add to that. And so obviously it was Godstone, wasn't it, that collapsed. But the same thing has happened in Effingham, where I live, on the other side of the chalk, where the Thanet Sands and the Reading beds, right in the middle of Effingham, had washed out. It was quite about 20 years ago or something like that, and there was a big hole in the road and all that sort of stuff, and the road was closed for a while they filled it all in. And I believe that was blamed on a leaky, some sort of leaky pipe, whether it was fresh water or sewage or whatever. But the simple question, I mean, it's an interesting question that relates absolutely to what you've been talking about, of if a pipe is in the ground surrounded by sand and it's leaking and it's washing out the sand, where's it washing it out to? And I just don't get that. But clearly these things happen over and over again. You know, the hole in the back garden, Godstone, Effingham,
Dorking repeatedly.
Yeah.
My parents' house.
Your parents. Stupid.
Folkestone Sands,
Yeah.
and known to us, there was a leak in the gutters,
Yeah.
the gutter pipe underground, and that washed away the footings, even though they were 6 feet down.
Yeah. Damn.
It demolished.
Yeah. Stupidly, of course, 20 years ago, I didn't take pictures of the holes in the middle of Effingham. But anyway, other questions? Yes. Okay.
Just talking again about Godstone there. Is that due to mining? There was a talk about there was mining problems there, or
I think so. And we have Dorking residents know we have a collapse in Dorking High Street about every 5 years.
Yes.
Recently, it was the West Street one. About 5 years before that, it was Pump Corner. 5 years before that, it was way down South Street. And I think it's always where there are cellars and cave systems underneath. And that's where the water goes to. And Godstone, I'm sure, is the same.
fair enough.
Richard, the only thing about that is that the water table ain't high enough to be doing the washing out there. I think that's actually just physical collapse of the sandstone without any additional agent for water flow.
Yeah, I guess the point is in an ancient town like Dorking, built on a sandstone that is easily dug, and things can be easily hidden in cellars underneath, and this sort of thing happens quite a lot. Other questions? Oh, yes. Sorry, at the back, Jim. Right, there you go.
Yeah, there must be cavities in the sand. I mean, you can take a sand and sort of pack it down, reshuffle it, and there must be larger cavities for a small leak to make a pit. I mean, these holes must start from the head and work back up, so they must have somewhere to go, even a small. And you would expect with water a smaller settling, as it were. Would that be correct?
Well, you'd have thought that during deposition there'd been sufficient shuffling, usually in water lane sands, for them to be relatively, at least not unstable enough to produce huge.
Because the South Street Cave wall that you're talking about, that's a huge wall. I mean, that's a huge area. So a lot of, I mean, and there's no evidence of it sort of going anywhere else, is there? Unless it went down an old well shaft and it was during human times, or times of occupation.
Unless that was one of these tunnels, which long before Dorking was built, flowed out towards the Pitbrook.
Yeah, and then
But I mean, it's through Dorking. I've got a map, a 6-inch map of Dorking from the council, showing all the underground tunnels. To the best of my knowledge, there are about 4 going under the high street.
Yeah.
I wouldn't, and I've said this many times, I wouldn't want to drive an HGV down Dorking High Street.
I'm glad you're
It's
not.
really
Richard.
quite scary. Nice one.
So, yes.
I'm interested in Godstone because I have a legal background, and for sure there are going to be a load of lawyers somewhere working out
Yes.
who to get some money from to fix it. And that'll mean expert witnesses coming to give their view of what went on. And it all gets settled in the end. But realistically, what do you think is the most likely reason for that sudden, and it was quite sudden, wasn't it?
Yes, and I think it's the same mechanism that keeps happening in Dorking, that there are underground mines, shafts, galleries, that there was a drain pipe, a water pipe of some sort that sprung a leak, and the water began to flow into the mine, and hence the pyramids, hence the whole thing collapsed.
So it was a combination of having
Yes.
old workings underneath
Yeah.
a leaky water pipe
Yes.
in this particular kind of sand.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes it very clear. Thank you.
Thank you. One of the things I've been thinking about recently is iron, and how that. So you look at the karst stone, and you know that the karst stone is diagenetic in the Folkestone beds, and then you look at the karst stone up on the Norfolk coast, and it's just massive. And is that also diagenetic? And I have not yet found anybody who's worked on the diagenesis of the iron in these things, and why they're like that and how they do it. And it's all part of water flow in these sandstones. And I would hope that, having said that, I will now be told where to go and look.
Well, I have a very simple mind, and I believe that the Folkestone sand was like the underlying sandstones. It was a glauconitic sand, and I think it was calcite cemented. When calcite cements sand grains, it actually corrodes the edges of sand grains, and you get this sort of jigsaw shape. And that's what I was pointing out in the Folkestone sand there. You're not seeing the original depositional shape of those sand grains. They've been altered by replacement by calcite, which is then leached out. We've got the Albion unconformity on top. And what I think has happened is that they were glauconitic sands like all the other units beneath it, shallow marine, what you expect. The glauconite is dissolved in those acid rains, and the iron is precipitated as the karst stones, as the ironstones, with these roll front uranium style that I've talked about.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's another lecture.
Yes.